Hey, Courage class. So before we jump in, I'm so excited to introduce today's guest, Courtney Pong. Courtney left a career in Silicon Valley tech to build something very different. She's now the owner of the Rozzie Square Theater, Boston's only Asian American woman owned improv theater, and a leadership trainer who helps Fortune 500 companies improve how their teams communicate, collaborate, and lead. But what makes Courtney's work so powerful is how she uses the principles of improv to teach real life leadership skills, like thinking on your feet, navigating uncertainty, and communicating with confidence. In this episode, Courtney shares why great communication starts with listening and how the improv rule of yes and can transform the way we handle conflict, and why the most important leadership skill might simply be learning how to meet the moment. Trust me, you're going to want to take notes for this one. Hey, Courtney, thanks so much for joining us. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Hi, Lindsay. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, is it okay if I just quickly share with folks who are listening how I first came to know your work?
Oh, I would thank you. Yes.
Amazing. So I remember going to this was a virtual conference, obviously, because it was 2020, and you were in charge of, I think, like warming up the conference or
Exactly.
just, making people feel more comfortable in their space. And I don't remember exactly what we did, but I remember how you made me feel.
Hmm.
And I remember the activity that we did. It was so much fun and there was so much joy. And what was incredible to me was that through the Zoom screen, I felt like for the first time connected to strangers. And so this is a very long way of saying thank you so much. I'm really so grateful to have you on the podcast, Courtney.
Oh, what a warm intro. That was perfect. Thanks.
Amazing.
It's funny because when I think back about that time, that
Yeah.
was my second time we're at that conference. And I remember we had started doing some improv on Zoom, like classes. And it's monumental that you would say that because the hardest thing about Zoom was everything we knew about you would give to an audience, but you couldn't feel anything back. So having it affirmed on the other end that it was the
Yes.
experience we wanted it to be, that is so positive. So thank
Yes.
you.
Yeah, absolutely. Indeed, it was. Courtney, I'd love to start off speaking directly to the person who's listening. So, for that person who really struggles with communication, if they were to take everything that you teach today to heart, how do you think their leadership or their communication skills would change in their lives?
Mm-hmm. So the number one thing that I see as the barrier to doing what we do, which is to improvise, is that performance is such a big is a misnomer. So a lot of people think that in order to do improv or to improvise, you need to be performing, or that's that barrier. A huge barrier to entry for these skills is performance.
Mm,
But at the end of the day, all it means to improvise is just simply to bring your experience to the moment, which means the more you experience, the more you're going to be able to meet the moment. So for somebody who's listening, thinking about how will these skills change my life, it
yes.
is the idea that you're going to consistently be working on skills that ask you to bring your skills to the moment. So every time you are met with a moment of being tested or challenged, you're going to be able to bring your skills there. So that's one of the biggest things I would say about these skills.
That's incredible. And, personally speaking, I feel like just meeting the moment is something like I'm such a perfectionist and I can tell when I'm being sort of performative. So I'm really
Mhm.
excited to hear what you have to say about that. But before we jump into even the skills, I wanted to share with folks that, Courtney, you are the owner and manager of the Rozzie Square Theater. You're Boston's only AAPI and woman owned comedy and improv theater, and you are sought after to develop leadership skills by many Fortune 500 companies. So, when it comes to your story, would you be willing to share with us what was that moment that caused you to move into improv?
Right. There are two elements to this. One is an actual physical event that happened, and the
Mm,
other was like a low level to growing high importance of just things that were coming bigger and bigger into my field of vision. So
okay.
the bigger and bigger into my field of vision was like I had spent about 12 to 15 years in working in high tech in Silicon Valley. So I had worked in public relations. That was my background,
Okay.
marketing, social media. And because of that, I had bounced around a lot to I started in an agency, a woman-owned agency, fantastic. And then I was like, got really interested in health tech. and started working at smaller startups, right? So I had more of a visibility into how companies were run and different types of leadership. And I think the biggest growing concern was that I kept meeting different types of truthfully male leadership that was just really hard to take, and the realization of like, oh, these are, yelling upwards is exhausting. And I just got really frustrated that no matter where I went, I was never finding leadership that I wanted to be a part of. So there was this piece of like, okay, well, if you're not finding the leadership that you want, and you know that yelling upwards is extremely exhausting, then it looks like you might need to go out and be the leadership that you always wanted, and invite other people to be a part of that. So
Yeah.
that became very apparent, especially since I had so much time to watch other people running companies, and was like, if, the jig is up, I could see them making decisions that were quite damaging, laying off half the workforce within a year, that kind of stuff where you're like, something is wrong. So I think that
Yes.
that gave me a little of the confidence. They gave me a lot of confidence to say, hey, I can fail too. So I'll just go fail at my own thing if that's going to happen.
That's
So that was, yeah, that was the one piece of just like the ever-growing presence in my career was like, I'm not sure what this path is, but I know I'm tired, and I know I'm tired of trying to guess and check for what I wanted. And it sounds like you might want to just go and create that yourself.
wow.
So that was one piece. The other piece was an actual physical event, which was, the background of my company is the theater is what we own in Boston. The company that runs the theater, that's my company. So it's called CSZ Boston, and it stands for Comedy Sports. But what it is Comedy Sports is a show that has been in over 30 cities for the past 43 years. So I own the license to produce the show in Boston. What that means is these casts and these shows for this company, we are all over the US. So I'm originally from the San Jose, California location. So what that meant is there are events where, once a year, all of these cities, 30 cities, we get together and we do shows for the community. We get to hang out together. And it was when in 2015, I was at one of these events. We were in Quad Cities, Iowa, and we were at, it's called our World Championship, but we were at our annual event where we were all hanging out, taking workshops, doing shows. And it was a run. I was on like a 5K jog with a lot of the, different performers that I'm friends with across the US. We were on a jog, and what had happened was I tripped and fell when I was running, which is, whatever. I tripped and fell when I was running, but I fell so hard that about 12 hours later at the closing night party, was starting to have really bad stomach pains. And as a result, they took me to the ER. We tried to figure out what was going on. We did all the scans. It turns out that I had flipped my intestines, like, which is very rare. I know. I always get the same response, which is like very fun to find out that to flip your intestines is very common in dogs, but it's very rare in humans. It's about 1 in 7 million. So what that resulted in was this huge, like almost 3 months of different surgeries and emergency surgeries, and trying to fix this and put me back. But through that entire time, I had been looking at what it might look like to. I'd heard that the license for the Boston location was potentially available, that the owner wanted to sell it. He'd only had it for a couple of years,
Mm.
and that perfect intersection between being dissatisfied with my career in public relations and in high tech, with noticing like, I had 3 months of this community of people in comedy sports, and my improv community just showing up for me as a community and as a collaborative force, that all I could think about was like, it's a perfect storm of the idea that if I could go and create this that I had been, had benefited from, if I could go and help create this community in other cities, specifically Boston, what would that look like? And that just felt like the strongest calling of like, all of the things are lining up of, it sounds like this is where you're headed next.
That's
And that was,
incredible.
yeah, actually tomorrow is my 10-year anniversary of moving to Boston.
Oh my
So it's been
gosh.
10 years.
Wow, congratulations on that. What a milestone, my goodness. And I feel like, first of all, thanks for sharing all of that. But, even when you're recounting your work in high tech, in public relations, I feel like that leadership story, or that story of looking up and seeing leadership that doesn't resonate, that's going to be something that really resonates, I think, with a lot of people in our community. And also, what a harrowing story and journey, like of what actually led you to the work that you do now in Boston. And you mentioned that you have an improv community. So by virtue, is that something that you had started to get involved with, like slowly but surely, and you were sort of doing it like as I want to call it a side hustle, but I don't know if that's fair to say. Like, is that while you were doing public relations, or was it sort of linear?
Yeah, improv was something that always lived in the background, and I found it because a theater teacher in junior college was like, "You are not good at theater." I mean, truly, his name is Todd, but he was like, "You're not great at theater, but I think you might like something called improv." So it just was, I'd always had an interest in some sort of a creative passion, but
Okay.
improv just kind of stood out as that thing. And then, it's most people in improv, we like the performance aspect, but you'll notice a lot of people, it's a very community driven art form where people
Mm.
stay in it for a while. And it's a lot because of the relationships and the friendships that you build. I mean, the nature of the art form is to be collaborative and you have to get to know people. You have to work with people to do this stuff. So it's just a natural benefit of the craft is the community is what makes you stay. So you get to know people and it really does, it's a very compelling piece.
I see. I see. Well, you mentioned community, and I'm wondering, would it be okay if we actually moved into the actual skill of collaboration and communication rather?
Let's do it.
Okay, so I want to talk specifically about creating a compelling pitch or story. So when you're teaching like how to tell your story, what do you think is the first thing that people really need to understand?
I mean, there are two big pieces. There is one is that most people think it's about saying the right thing, but as an improviser, everything we know about the craft is it's about being a great listener, first and foremost, being
Okay.
able to seek to understand your audience. So that's the first thing is improvisers, you have to, it's just like any other person. We are taking on a lot of information at once. Two is we are asked to bring our experience and our background and connection to that information. To
Mm,
then, number three, to then produce something that is effective, that is of quality, that reaches your audience. So, any presenter, any person that's pitching is doing the exact same thing.
yes.
So, one of the biggest things is just learning how to speak to the needs and knowledge of your audience in front of you because your audience is always going to change in what their background is. So, one of the first things we think about is just seeking to understand who your audience is before you start talking.
Okay. Okay. And what is the best way to do that? Because I imagine like if you walk into an elevator and all of a sudden it's like your dream investor or whoever, like you have a split second to assess like what to say and what to do. Like that skill set seems like it's maybe very different than actually giving a presentation where you know and you have time to prepare.
I mean, if we know that a basic human need on the hierarchy of needs is just to be seen, heard, and understood,
Uh,
we tend to overlook this, but we start with like, I got to get my story out really quick and tell people what I do. But
yes.
it's really not, we don't even know who this person is or what their needs are or what they even care about.
Uh,
So if everything we know is driven by relationships and rapport, some of the best things you can do in that moment is just be curious and ask a question and understand who this person is or even what they care about. So,
okay.
if you're in an elevator, it's kind of it for you proverbially. The idea that your job is to say what you do really fast is like who's listening to that? Who's ready for that, right? No one's ready. As
Uh,
opposed to, if you're talking to somebody for the first time, let's say that you sell bread, right?
yes.
Even just understanding, hey, like what's your best bite recently? What's your favorite bite you ate recently? Right? Just understanding like where are their taste buds? What are they interested in? What's exciting for them? As opposed to hey, I sell bread. Do you like bread? It's like you have no idea who this person is.
Uh,
So even just the start of, when we think about a pitch, we tend to think about what we have to say and forward, as
uh,
opposed to thinking about, your pitch is all encompassing, which is starting with seeking to understand. That could be a different way to better understand your needs and knowledge. Because then, of course, if we all just want to be seen and heard and understood, in that moment, somebody feeling understood and seen will go a lot further with keeping a captive audience than just, there's a difference between waiting to talk and listening to respond,
oh,
right?
I see. I see. It seems like a big part of that is like really getting that other person to do more of the talking in that
Absolutely.
moment. Yeah, okay. Is there like a simple structure that someone can use to communicate their story or to pitch? Like, is it like listen first or, and then like do that for 30 seconds and here's the perfectionist coming out in me, but do that for 30 seconds and then move
I
into
think
your pitch or,
there are a couple of different ways. So narrative and storytelling is a huge part of teaching level 1A beginning improv at our theater.
okay.
So it's the class third in the series of 8. So for a reason is when we teach storytelling and narrative, one of the first frameworks we focus on is just the art of telling a story is so important to improv and to improvising because stories are universal themes that people can follow. And if you can if you can use that framework, you're going to have a lot easier time guiding people through your information. So we think of a data scientist, right? Is you just have a lot of data, but if you can't organize it and tell a story, it's a little harder for people to understand and follow. So in the same fashion, if you are thinking about how to structure how you'll tell somebody about the thing it is that you do, it's a very simple formula, meaning you're focusing on one thing at a time and you journey through. So I'll give a quick example. So it's think about one. So one character, there's one obstacle, it has a chain of impact, and then there's one resolution, right? So you're really asking yourself to focus. It's really easy to say, oh, we do marketing and we do all these other things for your company, right? If you're selling something, but that's too much. And you also don't know what that person cares about. But if you're following the format of once upon a time, there was a blank named blank, and every day blank did blank until one day something changed. And because of that, and then you go on this chain, and because of that, and because of that, until one day, or I think it was the end, is like, and from that day forward, resolution. So think about that format. If it's just once upon a time, there was a simple thing. Every day something was the same until one thing changed. You go on a chain of events of impact and how things impacted, and then you find the resolution. So if you take that framework
Yes.
and think about it, about how you are pushing forward or how you are trying to share what it is that your product, your service, your thing does, it's going to ask you to challenge yourself to really distill it down to the most simple, most important thing, which can be quite hard for people because, we don't want to leave money on the table. We don't want to leave opportunity on the table. But the reality is, too much information is too much to parse through. We talk about this in our classes, which is the confused mind says no. If you have too much going on, there is that thing of like, I don't understand, I'm just going to say no. Whereas, so we think about what is a simple structure is just focusing on one hero, one obstacle, one thing it overcame, and then how, and just working through that because people can focus. Is that helpful?
Yeah, no, it's super helpful, and I think I'm totally that person who's like too much information all at
Me.
once and not really understanding and listening to the person sitting across the table, which is not good for a podcast host. But anyways, that being
Okay.
said, how, Courtney, do you get people to do that authentically? Like I feel like there could be a tendency to be very performative. Maybe initially at first, when you're following this beautiful framework that you've laid out.
Mm-hmm. I think, well, one of the reason why people, whether they know it or not, maybe it's a growing thing, but when people seek out improv workshops for two reasons, and it's very rarely at our theaters at performance. They seek it out for two reasons. One is because the skills that you're learning directly tie into what it is that you're trying to do, which is be a better communicator and be a better collaborator.
Mm,
But the other reason why people seek out an improv workshop, and here's how it ties into helping people speak with authenticity, is it provides one of the most supportive environments to do this work. And if we know
mm,
that improv is about bringing your experience to the moment, the more you experience, the better you're going to be able to meet that moment. What an improv workshop does, or what these skills teach, is how to simply be comfortable with your own confidence, the ability to stand there with both your feet planted and say, I said what I said, and to not undermine your own credibility. So,
mm,
at the end of the day,
that's
the only
great.
thing that there is practice. And the more you practice finding that friction and moving through it, the easier it's going to be. So you get to, we talk a lot about this with companies we work with when they want to do improv training, but they're not sure because, they've just never done it before. A lot of things we'll talk about is, they can learn, you can sit them down in front of a PowerPoint and say, hey, when a client does X, you're going to do Y. And you just kind of hope that when they get into that situation later down the road, that they'll use that skill. But the reality is they haven't practiced it. So I always tell them, like, they can either learn this in front of your client, or
Yeah.
they can learn it in a safe environment where they can practice. So, the things that help us speak with authenticity is just practice in it, feeling like you've made it your own. And the only way you make it your own is if you grow comfort with your own confidence and hearing yourself say something over and over again, to the point of where it just becomes, you're just comfortable hearing it, as opposed to seeing the skill and thinking, oh, I hope I use it when it's time. We all have
Yeah.
Instagram that we have saved and said, oh, I'm going to remember this tip. And then it goes away and you never see it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's in that vein.
I love that. I love that because that makes the skill like feel so attainable. Like when you
Mhm.
tell me that this is just about practice, and it even feels like everybody who comes through your workshops, like maybe has to be explicitly said, this is just about practice and doing it
Absolutely.
in the safe community space that we've created. You'd rather do it here
Yes.
and mess
Yes.
up a couple times and
Uh-huh.
keep practicing. versus like during game time. So I'm wondering, so the nerves kick in.
Mhm.
I presume, I mean, I've done it before, and yes, I feel the nerves kicking in. So what are some, you mentioned like just standing on your own 2 feet and staying grounded and being
Mhm.
confident in that. What are some techniques that help people stay grounded when those nerves inevitably kick in?
Right. So one of the biggest things we focus on in our beginning improv workshops is the habit. As we teach improv as habits and skills that you can learn and
Okay.
practice. At the end of the day, they are just actions that you can practice. So there are two things we work on. One of them is having what's known as a bias toward action. So what I mean is if we were to say, if I was going to ask you, hey, can you give me 5 things in this category? The category is fruits, right? So you would give me 5 things. The thing is, you don't know all 5 things at once, but as an improviser, you do know one, that you can never be stumped, and two, that you just need to
Oh,
start, right? So just
okay.
having a bias toward action of despite the unknown, I do not know how it's all going to turn out. Improvisers never do. When they're on stage, the audience gives them a suggestion and they just have to go. So I don't have any guarantee that what I'm going to produce in front of a paying audience is going to be funny or entertaining. I don't have any guarantee. But I do know that despite the unknown, despite what exists in front of me, I still have a responsibility to have a bias toward action and to just start and trust that my experience will kick in.
Wow.
And again, the more you experience, the easier it's going to get. So we work on just having that bias toward action of, I'm not sure, I am nervous, but I still have to start, right? The other piece of it that we work on in beginning improv is just the habit of moving on quickly from failure and moving on from the unexpected.
Okay.
The idea is that as soon as we are met with friction, we reset and just get going again. The
Hmm.
opposite, which most people are quite familiar with, is to sit in your brain and either speak poorly to yourself, or the way you talk
Yeah.
about your failures, it compounds over time.
Yeah.
So having a bias toward action, moving on from failure, and that can look like anything. That can just be, some sort of a reset or a word or something. We're just acknowledging I messed up and then just moving on. It's
Okay.
different than just sitting in your body and just not
Uh,
taking action. So,
yes. When you say like, "Oh, I messed up," like or you're like given a curveball question, maybe a client gives you, asks you a question or challenges what you say. How can someone use yes and to navigate that challenging question or conversation?
oh, I love this. So
Yes.
yes and is probably it is the most widely touted and understood. I use quotes for that, understood rule of improv. But
Okay.
yes and is very nuanced. It doesn't necessarily mean to always say yes and verbatim. If you can imagine, Lindsay, if you said yes to every meeting, you would never get anything done,
Yes.
right? So there are things we have to say no to, like budget or capacity or any of those things. If it's illegal, we have to say no to stuff, right? So when we think about the phrase yes and how we might use it to navigate challenges, it's easy to yes and like a road trip or something fun and positive. But yes anding something that's challenging is simply at the core of it, it just means to acknowledge and make a choice to move forward. So when we think about, if you and I are working together, we know how good it feels to be validated, heard, and understood, and to hear the word yes. We know how good that feels.
Yes.
And if we find ourselves in a situation where we cannot say yes to something, how yes and applies is there's always something to agree with. There is always something to find common ground over. So when you are met with something that is challenging or a conflict or some sort of an unexpected question, to be able to first greet it with embracing it as opposed to fighting it and being defensive.
Mm.
So, an example could be, what can you say yes to? And listening to respond. So, for example, if one of my performers or one of my coworkers comes to me and says, "Hey, I know how we can fit more people into this theater. We can only fit 50 people." And maybe they say, "Hey, I know what we can do. We can just cut another doorway in this non-load bearing wall, and then we have 2 doorways, and then the fire permits will let us get more people through
Yeah.
the door." Right. Well, I physically cannot do that to this space. I can't alter it. I don't own it. I lease this space. So it's normal to want to meet something challenging or a conflict of priorities with, no, we can't do that. Right. And that feels kind of crappy, right? To just like, no, we can't. And just immediately shutting
Yes.
down an idea.
Yeah.
But when you think about what about that idea that was brought to us, what can we say yes to, right? We can say yes to the shared enthusiasm over fitting more people into this space. We can say yes
Yes.
to coming up with new ideas. So the opposite way of responding to this person might be, thank you so, it's the thank you because it's the same thing as yes and. Thank
Yes.
you so much for bringing an idea that is prioritizing making our doors wider. because we won't be able to alter the physical space, we're held to some constraints with our lease. Let's put our heads together and figure out another way that we can make this space more warm and welcoming. So it is simply meaning to embrace and acknowledge that somebody took the time and the courage to ask a question or to bring something challenging to you, and then listening to respond and moving forward.
I
You
love
can
that.
go into this all day. Yeah, that's a very short answer of it, but yeah, it's a whole
No,
thing.
Courtney, that's so excellent. I love that because it just really, like, I can feel the collaboration and the building of a relationship when you say,
Mhm.
well, yes, and you acknowledge part, you say yes to part of the answer, but then you can, still move into like, let's put our heads together and figure something, another, solution to the challenge or what have you. But I
Right.
love that it's not an immediate like no, because it just feels, I don't know if this is the right language, but it feels like a softer approach. And it feels more, again, collaborative, and like you're
Right.
actually trying to be in conversation with the person, versus just shutting the conversation down.
Right.
um, you know and this is me projecting into asking this question, but many
Mhm.
of us sort of struggle to speak up. And I'm just going to generalize, generally speaking, in the Asian community. Can you help
Yeah.
us? Are there tools that can help us move through self-doubt, while standing firm in our voice?
I work with a lot of, I end up working at Northeastern quite a bit with their undergrads or their business
Okay.
students. So it's a lot of international students, which means, the average, yeah, I work with a lot with folks where failure is just a different form, right? It means it has the weight of perfection can be quite crushing. So I talk about this a lot. So here's one exercise we can talk about. One is take if you ask a different question, you get a different answer. So take this question and ask it of yourself repeatedly. The question is, what's not wrong with your life? This is just as a starting exercise. So if the question is, what's not wrong with your life?
Mm,
So I'll ask you this, Lindsay. So what's not wrong with your life? And you would give me a short answer. So you
yes.
might say,
I'm speaking with Courtney Pong.
okay, great. I'm
Yes.
going to ask again. I'm going to ask a few more times. What's not wrong with your life?
My kids are all healthy.
Okay. What's not wrong with your life?
I have a great relationship with my husband.
Hey, what's not wrong with your life?
I have a lot of friends who are supportive and wonderful.
Okay, great. So if we were to keep asking, which is how we do this game, you're going to get down to about 2 minutes of just producing lots of different things. And as you keep going, anybody here playing this game will notice you'll start to come out with just things like, I'm indoors, right? Or I'm wearing pants, right?
Yeah.
Which, how often do any of us sit there and exclaim, I'm wearing pants?
Mm,
But the reality is that most of the things that we're rattling off, even just now, you're rattling off some pretty neutral things. You
yeah.
definitely feel a certain way about them, but
Yeah.
those are pretty neutral things.
Yeah.
More often than not, you don't wake up every day saying, "Oh my gosh, I have great friends," right? We feel it, but we're not always talking
Totally.
about it. The point is, why is this important? Is it's pretty normal to look at something that we have done or that we have worked through or struggled through and seen our self-doubt and think, here are all the things that didn't go right. Or
Um,
we'll say, here's the one or two things that at least you did this well, but taking a second to go up a lot higher and examine it from the point of view of specifically what's not wrong, the ability to look at the experience as a whole and to understand really where the severity is of what you actually need to work on, it just takes some of the stress and the pressure off the idea that it wasn't perfect or that it's not moving forward. But the reality is, it is. When you look at your life and when you look at, and that's just for that, but
yes.
now take that question and I think about when I finish an initiative like a speech, right? I just did a women's speech in New York,
Yeah.
and I did like a warm-up session for an hour. And it's really easy to get off the stage and think, what did I mess up, right? I didn't
Mm.
have X, Y, and Z. But as opposed to saying, what's not wrong with that whole speaking engagement that I
Oh,
just
yeah.
to say, when I showed up, everybody was on time. The agenda ran on time. The guest speakers were amazing, right? So it's just so normal to pick it apart. But if for somebody that's navigating constant self-doubt, you're going to have to ask yourself different questions so you get different answers. And it's not about positive washing, quite the opposite. It's just about
Mm.
neutrally noticing how often our brains want to tell us that something isn't good enough or that we're not moving the needle, when to take the feelings out of it and just kind of
Yes.
look at it from a very data point, like this is so nerdy, but from a very neutral
No,
point of
I
view
love it.
of like, yeah, so that's something we can try and practice, which is what's not wrong with it, as opposed to what did great or what was awful. Like,
That's,
what can you neutralize and see how much it's all the things involved.
do you find that a lot of the people you work with, is their sort of default setting to be critical? Because realizing as I'm listening to you that that is actually my default setting.
We were growing up in an age where Anxiety is at an all-time high, especially now in the workforce. Remote
Yes.
work is just so prevalent that the younger generation is losing the ability to see modeling in front of them. So of course they're showing up to work more anxious. They don't see people fail regularly. So they don't know what it looks like when a leader messes up and has to apologize in the office setting, right? They're just kind of sitting in
Yes.
their apartment working, going, oh, I don't want to mess up. So when it comes to, this feeling of, it compounding or just
Yeah.
working through, it's understanding it's incremental. Like it can't understanding that it is a process. This feels so generic, but I know we just need these reminders.
Yes.
But it's iterative failure. If you're in an improv workshop, one of the biggest benefits you're going to get is you are rapidly failing. You are rapidly iterating and getting better and better in a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
It's probably why some people, if you've ever done like rock climbing or bouldering
Yes.
or any sort of like a recreational sport, pickleball is a great example. It's pretty easy to see like incremental change because you're making so many attempts in such a short amount of time. So, if there's one practice that improv really lends itself to is iterative failure in a very short amount of time, just so you feel that friction, move through it, and you have a more rapid feedback loop of knowing you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. So,
Absolutely. No, definitely. Thanks for saying that. Thanks for sharing that, Courtney. I have Dana in the weight room right
oh, okay.
now. Could I ask you just one more question?
Absolutely.
Okay. If there is someone who's listening right now, if there's one small step that they could take today to express themselves more fully, what would you want that to be?
Um, the biggest thing I end up teaching is that bias toward action, but specifically practice trusting your own confidence
Mm,
is the ability to, again, stand with both your feet planted and say, I said what I said and not ask for permission. And you hear this, if just a simple exercise is if you were to, we did this earlier, which is if you were just to say, hey, make a list of 20 breakfast foods, right? Most people, when we go to play this game, their brains, the first thing they'll do is they'll negotiate against themselves. The first thing they'll do is they'll say, can I think of 20? Or if you were to say 20 football teams, right? The football's not my sport. Most people will say, well, I don't know 20 NFL teams. And it's again, when your first instinct is to negotiate against yourself,
oh,
just noticing that is so important. So if somebody was to take one small and courageous step to express themselves more fully, it's just learning how to just trust your own confidence so that when you are met with a challenge, just noticing that your first response is to negotiate against yourself. And how do we start to change that? So when you challenge yourself with something small, like make a list of 20 baseball teams or whatever, that just the habit of just starting,
yeah.
just start, just to know that you are capable of starting and seeing what comes out of you, that is a totally different practice than, say, talking yourself out of doing this because you're not sure if you can get all 20. Like we're not even there yet, right?
Yeah.
So the short answer is practice trusting your own confidence and practice over and over and just notice how your attitude toward taking on a challenge shifts, right?
Wow.
It's just a willingness to
Yeah.
try.
No, that's so great. And that's going to help so many people, Courtney. I appreciate that. Bias towards action. Just do it, you guys. Just do it and trust your own confidence. So I appreciate this conversation so much. I'm going to bring Dana in at this point, if that's okay
That
with
sounds great.
you. Okay.
Yeah.
And I have her pitch lined up. And so we can, hi, Dana. How are
Hi,
you?
Hi,
Dana.
Lindsay. Hi, Courtney. How are you? Nice to meet you.
Good. You as well. Good to see you.
Dana, thanks so much for joining us. I was wondering if it would be okay if maybe we could give you the opportunity to just briefly introduce yourself and share Urban Sandbox. And then I'd love to play the pitch for folks who are listening.
Sure.
Okay. And then, Courtney, you can take it away if that's okay with you as well.
That sounds great. Let's go.
Okay. Excellent. So, Dana, I'll give you the floor. If you'd like to introduce yourself, that would be great.
Sure. Hi, my name is Dana Okuyama. I'm the founder and CEO of Urban Sandbox. We created Urban Sandbox to really encourage students to express themselves, to appreciate their differences, and at the same time, we want to provide all the resources for families to directly access to mental well-being, health professionals, and really directly connect them with the professionals for direct support.
That's excellent. Thanks so much. So, Dana, at this point, I'll just share with folks. So, we sent this to Courtney ahead of time just so she could take a look at it. But just for the sake of sharing with the audience, I'd love to play your pitch as well.
Hi, my name is Dana Okuyama, founder of Urban Sandbox. The entire vision for Urban Sandbox was inspired by my son's experience. which led me to transition my career into mental health and commit to prevention and early emotional support for children and families. Urban Sandbox focuses on children's preventive mental well-being in two key ways. First, we encourage creative expression because when children are given safe ways to create, they build confidence, develop resilience, and learn to process their emotions. Second, we connect families directly to trusted mental wellness resources, ensuring support is accessible early before challenges escalate. Today, school psychologists are responsible for hundreds of students, making individualized care difficult. Urban Sandbox helps close this gap by connecting families, schools, and care providers in one streamlined system. By collaborating with school psychologists and graduate trainees, we expand capacity and move closer to a true one-to-one support model, where every child can be seen, understood, and supported. Our mission is simple but powerful. Make mental wellness care universal, equitable, and proactive so every child can grow with confidence, resilience, and the support they deserve.
Okay, great. All right, where do we want to start? What's the most helpful way to start digging in?
Dana, did you have thoughts around that, or would you like just, feedback on maybe sort of your delivery or what you said explicitly?
Yeah, I would love some feedback for my pitch, my delivery,
Okay,
and
yeah. Okay, let's start with this is my most favorite thing. So with pitch competitions or even just pitching in general. So one of the first things is that we teach this in improv, which is nobody cares about you. I don't have a better way to say it, but one of my best improv teachers taught me that, which is, if we were to, when I'm in a room with people and we're doing improv exercises, everybody is quite self-conscious because you're focused, the idea that everyone's looking at you, but the reality is we're all thinking about ourselves. So as soon as you get into a room, your audience, they're thinking about themselves. They're thinking about how this applies to them. Why do I even care? So just even noticing that when we start off the pitch, Dana, you're starting off with speaking about one, you're introducing yourself with just briefly your name, but you immediately start with, here is why I started it and who my family is and where that comes from. But the reality is that your audience has no idea who you are. They don't know anything about your personal life. And it's not that they don't care so much as they need to know within the first 5 seconds why this applies to them, right? So what we're thinking about is how can we, if we know that trust and rapport is so important and that people are able to focus a little bit more on the content if they've built more of a relationship with you, they're more invested in who you are as a person. We want to see if we can swap. So how do we start with the consumer or the audience's needs first? So how do we make it more of playing into their experience? So what was your son's experience?
Well, he was diagnosed with ADHD. I actually just had a meeting with the school this morning, and then I feel that with a kid like him, we can't really focus on this unfortunate shortcoming of his very much because when he was younger, and then he actually got labeled by his peers, and then his teacher actually saw him differently. And as a mom, I mean, as an Asian mom, we all have very high expectations for our kids, and then I guess I probably emphasized on that portion of him or that personality a little too much, which caused him to lose a lot of confidence. It actually took me 3 to 4 years to build that confidence back. And I guess this morning when I had the meeting with schools, and I was basically telling the teachers, I don't want this to be a focus, because when we focus on a person's shortcoming, we tend to lose sight of what this person is as a whole. And then, so yeah, that was my experience, challenging journey with him. And then I had to reach out to a lot of professionals to really get to know my son, and then get to know what this ADHD is. And then, because every kid is different, even though they all have ADHD, they behave very differently as well. So, and then finding that right support actually took a lot of time and quite costly as well. So that's how, I started this journey, and then that was basically my background. And I'm so happy that Courtney, you're giving me some advice here, because I've changed my pitch a million times already, and then a lot of people are actually telling me different things. Some people say, hey, you should start with your personal story, but like you said, I do think you're right, because people often, think about themselves, right? They don't really care about your story. So
Right.
I'm trying to find a very compelling way to really get people's attention, to make them
Right.
listen. Yeah.
Absolutely. And here's the best thing I can share as an improviser. Our audience is always different. When we walk out to do a show for a paying audience, sometimes we think it's going to be people on dates, and it's like some people on dates, but it's like 30 kids, junior high school kids that are at like a friend's sleepover. And that's a totally different audience, right? So one of the best things we can keep in mind is that your audience is always going to change. So
Right.
being able to be aware of that, that's one of the best things you can do to feel ready when you walk onto a stage or a pitch, is just noticing that I'm not giving the same rote speech every time. There is no best way. There is only best for the moment. So everything you just said has a lot of great stuff in it. So let's very quickly break it apart. You said so many different things that parents resonate with. And let's just start with that audience. So
Yeah.
parents resonate. So what are just, let's just call out three emotions in your experience journeying with your son. Just pick three. So one, I was blank because blank.
I was frustrated because I
Because,
couldn't find the right help.
okay, that's one thing, right? I was frustrated because I couldn't find the right help for my son, right? That is a universal theme that people connect with. What's another emotion? I was blank because why?
Um, I was, this is really good practice.
And if,
I was
that's what I
sad
mean.
because I
Mm.
emphasized too much on my son's shortcoming.
Ooh, and just as a parent, like what parent cannot connect with something
Yes.
like that, right? So
Exactly.
that's what we want to start with is how do we connect with our audience immediately and then bring them with us? So imagine starting with something like, we'll just kind of spitball. Imagine starting with, I was sitting there at the edge of the bed and I couldn't shake how sad it felt to be a parent that couldn't understand her son, right? Especially as an Asian mother. Now, here's the thing. If you are in front of, let's say, a room full of parents that are all of AAPI background, that might land quite well. If you are in a room full of just simply parents of all different backgrounds and dynamics, you might just say, I was so sad as a parent of my son, right? That is something, a universal theme that parents can connect with. So we're leading with what meets our audience where they're at, right? That's probably the biggest thing we're focusing on is how do you meet them where they're at versus try to get them to come to you, right? Trying to get them to come to you is saying, hey, everybody, I do X, Y, and Z, and here are my A, B, C, here are my words that I know in my language, as opposed to how do you meet them where they're at? What is something most parents can a universal theme or an emotion they experience? Sadness, right? So if we just take that piece, so imagine starting off the pitch with, you know, 20, 5 years ago, I was sitting in my room and I just couldn't shake the sadness that I felt over not being able to understand my son. Has anybody else felt like that? Have you ever felt like that? And getting people to understand that, yes, we're on the same page. Everything we know about improvisers is how can we meet our audience. So yes, we have felt like that. You get them to agree. Yeah, I have felt like that. We've all felt like that. All I could think about was how misunderstood my son felt, how awful this is going to feel moving forward. And that's how I stumbled upon X, Y, and Z, right? So trying to start with meeting the person where they're at in their emotion, everything we connect with, that's a totally different approach. Again, there's no bad or right approach. There is just a different approach that is effective with our audience. So that's
Right.
one way, right? The other
Right.
thing you mentioned was like, I was frustrated, right? So you can see where this is going. So I'll start with that. How does that resonate?
Oh, this is fantastic, Courtney. Do you mind if I ask you a question? So I'm actually going to a conference next week to meet a lot of school psychologists, right? And I'm trying to refine my pitch in front of school
Mhm.
psychologists. And I do feel that telling them about my personal journey probably is not the best idea. So I would love, yeah, I would love some suggestions.
Right. So let's think about your audience. If a majority of your audience will be, who will they be? What is the type?
School psychologists
Okay. So if we
or
think about
and schools. Yeah.
what do they mostly care about in terms of, yeah, what do they mostly care about? Do they care about seeing more support at home? What do they care about? Like their
I
top
think
two.
they I think they care about support for themselves.
Ooh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you put yourself in their shoes and make them the hero, right? What might that, I mean, here's something interesting. What has been your experience with a school psychologist, one-on-one? Like what is the moment that you remember where they exhibited a feeling or an emotion towards you, or you just were in the conversation, you could feel it different?
Right. I couldn't be 100% open with a school psychologist because the school psychologist knows my son's teachers and, she knows my son as well. But I feel that that's a very a tricky sentence to say because I don't want to offend school psychologists. Because I do know that, they have what's it called, doctor-patient confidentiality, right? So they are not going to reveal anything about my son. But at the
Right.
same time, as a parent, we always have this, fear on the back of our mind that,
Right.
oh, okay, people are going to label my son.
Right. Right.
So I just, so there's, it's tricky, right?
Right. I think just what you said is like there's no reason why that can't be a part of it, which is when we take away the curtain and we are ourselves, at the end of the day, people just want to feel heard and understood and seen. That's just a basic need. So for a school psychologist to feel deeply seen and deeply heard, and for you to say, I see you. I know this is not, I know that this is not easy. I see exactly like all the burden that you're carrying, to meet them where they're at and show them that you understand from how tough this might be. It just kind of starts to break the barriers down and the walls down, which is different than saying, I know about your job and I know what that's totally different. Or pleading with a school psychologist to understand you is different than seeking to understand them, right? Even just like take like basic communication skills between two partners, right? I think we've definitely heard this from like Gottman Institute, that kind of stuff, around how when two people in a romantic relationship, when they're fighting, right? The arguments that go the worst are when it's just person against person. The arguments that go the best, or the discussions that go the best, is when both people are seeking to understand. So if we think about when you're starting your pitch to a totally different audience than parents, and you're starting it to school psychologists, one way we can think about approaching it is, how do you start with showing them that you understand or are seeking to understand them? That's more likely to get, their attention, or at least to meet them where they're at, because they're walking in with their own needs and knowledge. So I'll give this example. If you were going to try and sell a smartphone to me, like just a regular iPhone or an Android phone, but I'm not from this era, I'm from, say, like Shakespeare times, right? What do you think I care about? I probably don't care about Facebook Marketplace, right? I probably don't care about the fact that I can access online banking on my phone. That's not important to me as somebody who lives from the Elizabethan times, right? But what do I care about? I probably care about communication faster than like a pigeon, right? I probably care about something like having art,
Navigation. Yeah.
exact
Yeah.
navigation, knowing when the next plague is going to
Yeah.
hit us, right? So what you're trying to do in that first, and you only have 15 seconds, right? Or so there. What you're trying to do in those first few seconds is directly speak to the needs and knowledge of the audience in front of you, which is different than sharing your needs and knowledge, right? Your needs and knowledge are always going to be there, but your audience needs to be met with where they're at. So how can you directly speak to their needs and knowledge? So again, it's going to change per audience, but if one of your audience is school psychologist, you might walk in with, uh, you know, we've all been there, one against one in the school office. Its tensions are high, right? Describe a situation that we've all found ourselves in this dynamic, from parent to school psychologist. You probably wouldn't share that same dynamic if you were speaking to, say,
A
like
group
a
of
doctor,
parents or
a
yeah,
parent.
doctors. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Whereas opposed to, if your audience were all parents, you might put yourself at home and say, we've all been there. You're sitting in the kitchen and your kid is on his eighth meltdown, right? We know what that feels like as a parent. Whereas a school psychologist probably doesn't know what that feels like in theory, right? So again, we're focusing on, if we're going to start the storytelling, which we should, storytelling is so important. If we're going to start the pitch, we focus on, the first approach is, how do I best speak to the needs and knowledge of the audience that's in front of me right now?
Wow. Wow.
Well, that's very helpful. Thank you so much, Courtney.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
I'm
funny
just
because toward
taking
the
notes.
end, what's that?
No, go ahead,
Oh, I
Courtney.
just said I'm just taking notes. Yeah.
Oh, great. It's funny because at the very end you said what I was like, oh, that could be at the top. But I think about, like, when I think through my pitch, like if I'm talking to fellow improvisers that do improv comedy and that do improv for more of their, like, more than just a hobby, I'm probably going to use words like game of the scene, setting up your platform, right? But those words mean nothing to non-improvisers. Whereas if I'm working with companies, I'm usually using words like bias toward action, right? Iterative failure. These are words that group who does professional development and learning and development in those companies, they understand that language. So it really is about being able to adjust on the fly. So if I'm explaining what my service does to, let's say, my father, he does not speak in the language of corporate. He just never worked a corporate job. It's just not part of his language. So when I speak to him, I'm probably not going to say, I teach professional development for communication and collaboration workforce, right? I usually might say, I help people work together better. Right. It's a little bit more, you're meeting their needs and their knowledge for where they're at. If you were trying to explain what a microwave is to a cave person, you're probably not going to use the words radioactive. You're probably not going to use the words like frozen burrito. They don't know what that is, right? But a cave person understands small cave, right? They don't know what a box is, but they know what a small cave is, right? So your ability as an improviser is to look at the information in front of you and choose which pieces will resonate the most so that you're effective versus efficient, right?
Right.
Wow.
Oh, this is really helpful,
This
Courtney.
is
So,
incredible.
yeah,
Good.
I get to be a fly on the wall. So this is incredible. Go ahead, Dana. I'm sorry.
yeah, sorry. I have another question for you, Courtney. So
Yeah.
over the past few months, right, I've been trying to sort of sell my product to schools, but then I realized that school is really not my target audience. So I made a quick change of direction. But this time at the conference, I would love to establish some connections with schools, because I do know that for parents in their school communities, this platform can really benefit them. But at the same time, in my past work experience, right, and also in business school, they always tell you, oh, you need to start a conversation with small talks. You need to know how to talk about weather. But the feeling that I've gotten from all the schools in the past is that they don't care about the small talks. They want to know what you're selling, because in their minds, right, they already know that, oh, okay, you're speaking to me as a vendor, so they have a preconceived notion about what I'm going to say, but
Sure.
that's not what I'm going to tell them. So there is already a misconnection, a miscommunication in the beginning that existed in the very beginning already. So to break that barrier, I find that extremely difficult, because I'm trying to build a trusted business here, and then the school doesn't really trust me to begin with. So how do I start a conversation that will make them feel comfortable? Oh, to know that this person is really not selling to us. This person is trying to help the families in my community.
And if I could just interject really quick, we probably have about one more minute, if that's okay.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of different ways to think about this. One is we did this is we focus on education-based materials. So we focused on just in general, we are the experts in this field. You may not end up using our product or our service, but we are the experts. So just constantly framing yourself as the expert in the topic as a subject matter expertise, that's one thing. Not just your product, but the subject matter expertise. The other piece I was going to say was your ability to start with the outcomes that you provide and the outcomes that you see, and understanding what outcomes do they even care about. You might be able to sit there and spit out like, we have X amount of, transition from A to B, but they might even care about that stat. So just starting to understand what their outcomes that they're even looking for and leading with that could be another way. Again, we're kind of under the gun at this point, but my first thought is just establishing yourself as somebody who is deeply listening and trying and seeking to understand them. But I mean, yeah, we could talk about this all day.
That's so excellent.
Well,
I mean,
thank you so much, Courtney.
yeah, I just want to say really like Courtney was so powerful to see the way in which you were interacting and the feedback that you gave. And Dana, I just want to commend you because, and Courtney as well, it's not easy to be, I think in like online and in a coaching relationship and giving feedback in real time and pitching yourself. So I just want to commend both of you and thank you really, truly for the courage that you demonstrated just now. And Dana, I want to also share that when Courtney was really pushing you to identify the emotions of the parents, I was sort of emphatically shaking my head because I can connect directly as a parent to your story. I can understand it deeply. And it actually made me look at, because I've spent some time on the Urban Sandbox website, it made me look at your platform differently. I'm like, oh, yeah, like this is a problem and this is a real need. And I felt that way when I was reading your material, but it sounds very different when Courtney was really pushing you to identify the emotions that would connect with parents in your audience. So I just wanted to share that observation with you as well.
Well, thank you, Lindsay. That was a hard exercise to do, Courtney. I appreciate that, though.
Yeah, I think my biggest thing is like just to not shy away from the human aspect of all of it. In fact, leading with the human aspect is what helps us connect. The opposite is when we just kind of reduce things down to a mass of people that we're going to help. But there's a reason why we don't react to 500 people were dancing as opposed to one woman who has blonde hair in a scarf was just, colorful and dancing. We can picture that. So what can you do to like really distill it down to one person to help us picture it? And then you can go anywhere after that, but you got to help us picture it.
Right. Yeah, that's very helpful. Very
That's
valuable.
excellent. Yeah.
I don't know how
Thanks,
my son is going
everyone.
to feel about this, that I'm talking about him openly.
But to Courtney's point, it helps people sort of connect, and you have to be discerning, of course, in terms of what you want to share. And I can identify as a parent who has an overactive like little guy in a classroom. I'm like, oh yeah, I get that. I get that 1,000%. And then wanting to help, but not wanting him to be like labeled. I get that. And I feel like I was feeling that there's a lot of parents who have had that experience. So, but ladies, thank you so much. Is there anything, Courtney, that I didn't ask you that maybe you wanted to share?
The thing I'll always share is you do not have to be on stage to benefit from all of these things that improv can help us work through. It just is always it can look quite daunting, but you never have to want to be on stage to benefit from all of the things that improv brings around resiliency and communication. Improv can be a space where it doesn't look like it's for you, but it is absolutely for you. And that's always what I want to leave people with is these skills are for you.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And on that note, Dana and Courtney, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Thanks for joining me on this episode of Courage Class. I hope today's conversation gave you a little encouragement and inspiration. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And for extra motivation, tools, and behind-the-scenes content, sign up for my newsletter. I'd love to share with you more there. See you next time.